For the first time in 20 years, American warplanes are landing in Puerto Rico again. And this time, it's not for training. The old runways at Roosevelt Roads, once silent, now shake with the roar of F-35B stealth jets and C-17 cargo planes. The U.S. Navy's amphibious ships circle nearby, carrying 10,000 troops just 1,000 miles from Caracas. On paper, it's called a counter-narcotics operation. But few people believe that's the real reason. For the first time since the Cold War, the Caribbean Sea has become a chessboard again. Every move, every flight, every deployment changes the balance of power in the region. To Washington, it's a message. To Venezuela, it's a warning. And to the Caribbean nations, it's a reminder that history can repeat itself. This quiet buildup is not random. It's strategic, calculated, and designed to send a signal. Because this isn't just about drug cartels or training drills. It's about a forgotten base reborn, a rivalry revived, and a region standing on the edge of a new Cold War. Stay till the end, because what's happening in Puerto Rico could reshape Latin America's future. In 1943, the United States Navy built a massive stronghold on the coast of Puerto Rico. It was called the Roosevelt Roads Naval Station, the crown jewel of America's power in the Caribbean. For decades, its runways, shipyards, and fuel depots served as the front line for U.S. missions across Latin America. It was here that fighter jets launched during the Gulf War, and where submarines refueled before secret patrols. But by 2004, the Cold War was over, the base was shut down, the soldiers left, and silence took over. For years, grass and vines grew through the cracked runways. Locals called it the ghost of the Navy. The land, 8,650 acres of coastline, sat untouched for nearly 20 years. The old hangars rusted, the control towers fell quiet, even the ocean reclaimed parts of the pier. Then, in 2025, everything changed. Bulldozers returned, trucks rolled in, and fences went up overnight. From silence to sirens in a single week. No one knew why, only that Washington was suddenly watching again. Old Navy maps were reopened, new construction permits were signed, and the people of Puerto Rico began to ask one question. Why would America bring back a base it once promised never to use again? In August 2025, President Donald Trump made a surprise announcement from the White House. He authorized military force against Latin American drug cartels. But what sounded like a security move quickly became something much bigger. At the same time, he signed a $50 billion defense package, and its center point was Puerto Rico. For the first time in 2 decades, the U.S. military began reactivating the Roosevelt Roads base. Trucks, troops, and tactical aircraft started arriving within days. Officially, it was about fighting cartels and protecting trade routes. But unofficially, it was about strategy. The base's location gives the United States direct reach into the Caribbean and the northern coast of South America. From Roosevelt Roads, a fighter jet can reach Venezuelan airspace in less than 1 hour. What the White House calls containment, others call provocation. In Caracas, leaders accused Washington of preparing for intervention. In Moscow and Beijing, military analysts called it the new Monroe Doctrine. Even allies in Europe began to worry. The same week, Trump doubled Nicolas Maduro's bounty to $50 million. The message was clear. This wasn't just about drugs. It was about dominance. But the question remains, what exactly is being built behind those reactivated gates in Puerto Rico? It started quietly. Within days, 10 F-35B Lightning II jets from Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 225 landed at Roosevelt Roads. For the first time in 20 years, the base's runways roared again. Alongside them came MV-22 Ospreys, CH-53K King Stallions, and C-17 Globemasters. The once abandoned airfield turned into a forward combat zone almost overnight. Local workers watched as cargo planes, fuel trucks, and personnel carriers filled the old hangars. Satellite photos soon revealed what official statements did not. New hardened aircraft shelters were rising fast. Fresh radar towers appeared along the coastline, and several landing pads were being built, large enough to host stealth helicopters or missile batteries. The Pentagon said it was routine readiness, but locals didn't buy it. Many Puerto Ricans remembered Vieques, another island once used for U.S. bomb testing. They feared noise, pollution, and danger would return with the soldiers. Community leaders demanded answers, but Washington stayed silent. Meanwhile, the F-35s that landed in Puerto Rico came from the same Marine squadron once deployed in the South China Sea. To many, that connection meant only one thing. This base was being prepared for more than drug patrols, because while the skies were getting crowded, something even bigger was moving in the waters nearby. Just off Puerto Rico's coast, the Caribbean Sea looks different now. For the first time in 30 years, a full U.S. Navy task force patrols the region. 8 warships form what military analysts call the largest American fleet in the Caribbean since the 1990s. At the center is the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, supported by Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and 1 nuclear-powered submarine. To Washington, it's a show of readiness. To Venezuela, it's a show of force. Each vessel carries Marines trained for rapid island seizure, the kind of mission that can move in hours, not days. Helicopters circle above, drones sweep the coastline, and refueling tankers hum quietly in the distance. To some, the sight is reassuring. To others, it's intimidating. The Caribbean hasn't seen this kind of power display since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Local fishermen now see gray hulls instead of blue water. At night, lights from destroyers shimmer across the horizon like a silent warning. Among the ships is the USS Jason Dunham, a vessel already famous for its frontline missions in the Middle East. But soon, that same ship will make headlines again for something no one expected. And then, that incident happened. September 4th, 2025. The USS Jason Dunham patrols east of Puerto Rico. Calm waters, routine drills. Then, 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets appear on radar. They dive low, flying just 200 feet above the American destroyer. For a few seconds, no one moves. Then the US radars lock on. Within minutes, F-35B stealth jets scramble from Roosevelt Roads. The Caribbean Sea goes silent, waiting for someone to blink. No shots are fired in the air, but the tension hits boiling point. Hours later, the response comes. U.S. warships intercept 4 Venezuelan-flagged vessels off the coast of Dominica. Missiles hit fast and hard. All 4 ships are destroyed. 21 people die, including Colombian nationals working as crew. The Pentagon calls it a counter-narcotics strike. Caracas calls it murder. Across Latin America, protests erupt. In Colombia, officials demand answers. In Brazil, newspapers print the headline, "War returns to the Caribbean." Russia and China condemn the U.S. action, calling it a violation of sovereignty. Washington stays firm, calling the operation part of its narco-terrorism campaign. But behind closed doors, Congress is briefed on something much bigger: war powers. And that raises one chilling question. If this was only about cartels, why is America's Congress preparing for war? At Roosevelt Roads, soldiers stand on the runway as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth arrives by helicopter. He looks at the jets, the Marines, and the ships in the distance. Then he says, "This is not training. This is real." Those words change everything. A few hours later, Congress gets an official report. It says the U.S. military is now in an armed conflict against transnational criminal networks. The words sound familiar. They sound like the early stages of past U.S. interventions in Panama, Iraq, and Syria. Officials say this is only about cartels, not countries. But inside the Pentagon, the orders say something else. Media access to the base is cut off. Satellite images are now restricted. Press visits are quietly canceled. The White House tells reporters there is no war in the Caribbean, but on the ground, tanks, jets, and convoys tell another story. More than 10,000 U.S. troops are now active in the Caribbean zone. Surveillance flights over Venezuela have doubled. Navy patrols move closer to the South American coast. Officially, it's still called a counter-narcotics mission, but unofficially a shadow war has already begun. And while Washington denies it, Venezuela is getting ready for what's coming next. In Caracas, the message is loud and angry. President Nicolas Maduro calls the U.S. attacks imperialist aggression. He says Washington has crossed a red line. Across Venezuela, the military moves to high alert. Fighter jets patrol the skies. Missile batteries are reactivated near the coast, and soon, Russian military advisors quietly return to Caracas. The ghost of the Cold War rises again, this time over the Caribbean Sea. For the first time in decades, Russian planes share the same airspace as American patrols. To many, it feels like history is repeating itself. In the middle of the tension, Qatar steps in, offering to mediate peace talks. But neither side moves an inch. The U.S. says it's fighting drug cartels. Venezuela says it's facing an invasion. Every statement, every broadcast pushes the two nations closer to conflict.
On social media, Maduro mocks the US fleet, calling them pirates of the Caribbean. But behind the jokes, the danger is real. Warships and submarines now face each other across the same stretch of sea, each one waiting for the other to make a mistake. And in the middle of it all lies Puerto Rico.
The new front line of power in the Caribbean. So what does Puerto Rico stand to gain or lose in this growing storm? For years, Puerto Ricans fought against this base. They called it unwanted, dangerous, and loud. Back then, the island remembered Vieques, where US bombing tests shook homes for decades. That controversy forced the Navy to close the site in 2004. For 20 years, Roosevelt Road stayed silent. But now, everything has changed. The same land once filled with protests is alive again, with trucks, jets, and jobs. The US military calls it a strategic rebirth. Locals call it a second chance. More than 4,500 civilians now work inside the base, in construction, logistics, and support. New businesses, restaurants, and housing projects are growing around it. Even tourism is rising as American workers and their families move in. For many on the island, the base means stability and steady income. But not everyone agrees. Some worry that prosperity is now tied to war. They ask, what happens if the fighting spreads? In San Juan, senators introduce a bill to make the base permanent. If passed, it would keep the US military in Puerto Rico for generations. The move divides the public. Some see growth, others see risk. Because this new mission brings not just jobs, it brings power. And with it comes a question no one can ignore. What message is Washington really sending to the entire hemisphere? The United States now holds more firepower in the Caribbean than at any time since the 1980s. Over 10,000 troops are on alert. 8 US warships patrol the region. And from Puerto Rico, jets can reach any Latin American capital in under 2 hours. To Washington's allies, this means reassurance. To its rivals, it looks like a warning. Colombia, Cuba, and Brazil all raise their military readiness levels. Across the hemisphere, governments start to watch closely. The Pentagon calls the buildup peace through presence, but critics see it as provocation through power. For many Latin Americans, this feels like the return of the old empire, the kind that once shaped their politics and borders. Inside defense briefings, the region now has a new nickname, Southcom Plus. It means a permanent forward command, built to stay, not visit. Airfields are being mapped. Ports are being expanded. Satellite links connect every base to Florida in real time. What started as a counter-narcotics mission now looks more like a regional military network. Each new move strengthens US influence, but also raises fear of confrontation. Because in today's world, power projection is no longer about fighting wars. It's about showing you could win one before it even starts. So what's the real end game behind this so-called drug war? The world is watching the Caribbean heat up again. What was once a peaceful sea is now filled with warships, jets, and tension. US destroyers move near Venezuelan waters. Venezuelan fighters patrol the skies. Russian-linked advisors land quietly in Caracas. All of them within 1,000 miles of each other. One wrong move could start a crisis the world hasn't seen in decades. Every radar ping and radio call feels like the start of something bigger. The Roosevelt Roads base has now become the center square on this chessboard of power. A place once closed in the name of peace, now reborn in the name of deterrence. Locals hear the jet engines again, but this time the sound means uncertainty. The Pentagon quietly calls it the new Guantanamo of the North. It's not just a base, it's a message. That message says, the United States is back, and it's not leaving. To Washington, this is about security and strategy. To others, it looks like a new Cold War taking shape. One built not on walls, but on waves. Because the fight for control isn't over land anymore. It's over airspace, ocean routes, and the right to decide who rules the hemisphere. But is this really about Venezuela, or something far bigger? The reactivation of Roosevelt Roads isn't about cartels, it's about control. Classified papers show the base's real purpose: a NATO logistics hub ready to move troops, jets, and ships across the South Atlantic. Its reach extends from Venezuela to the Panama Canal, even near Africa's trade lanes. The Caribbean, once America's backyard, is now its front line. Every plane that leaves Puerto Rico doesn't chase smugglers. It reminds the world who still rules the sea. When nations reopen old bases, they reignite old rivalries. History never ends, it just waits to return. 20 years ago, Roosevelt Roads was silent. Now its engines roar again, echoing across the Caribbean. The real question isn't if America's back, it's what happens next. Because every move now has the power to start a fire. From forgotten runways to fighter jets, the Caribbean is now a global pressure point. The base that once meant peace now prepares for power. Do you think this buildup is about cartels or something much larger? Comment your thoughts before the next move is made.